This video is about a topic that's very important in understanding Assyrian theology, Assyrian philosophy. It is embedded from the beginning when we're looking at texts like the book of Genesis. It's about the four elements. And the four elements are an ancient concept that makes sense, I believe, once we kind of understand what the ancients were doing. But it's crucial to the entire cosmology, the way of understanding the universe, especially in the Church of the East tradition, especially in the larger Assyrian tradition, starting from St. Ephrem and going back to Greek thought, but it's also something that we see going back to Genesis 1. And my video on Genesis 1 also deals with this element of the elements, these concepts. But let's just get started and get into what they are. So going back to a very classical explanation of it, it was right there in the Wikipedia on the four elements. Now, the four elements are not something that most people understand well unless you can really understand things like there's a text, for instance, in the Khudra, the prayer book, that speaks of the great cycle that is set by God, created out of 8 elements. If you don't instantly go, oh, that's the four elements and then the kind of four qualities from which they're derived, so he's creating 8, then you probably don't understand the four elements, and there's a huge amount of just even our daily prayer book contains this kind of Neoplatonic, this kind of even alchemical language. And those are some big words, and alchemy means the concept of understanding the substructures of creation, and Neoplatonism did a lot of that. It's in this sense the idea that God conceived of heaven and earth, and he conceives of what things are, and we are just in a process of becoming. We participate in divine truth, divine realities. That which God understands human to be, that's the essence of human. That's a real human being. I'm only human insofar as I instantiate that. So that's a fundamental concept, but it's worked out in tremendous depth. So let's start looking just at this building block of understanding the four elements. The four elements don't start off as elements per se. They start off with the idea of quality. And what they were doing is understanding that the matrix of existence, what we would consider atomic and subatomic particles. Between the particles, there are qualities that allow those particles to exist, that those particles are actually combinations of those qualities. So it's a very quantum way of thinking. We're used to thinking extremely materially, extremely mechanically, so that if isn't something that you could see through a microscope, it's hard to conceive of it. And it wasn't until 20th century physics that we started thinking about kind of the space between the physical, if you get what I'm saying. Won't try to explain it too much through modern stuff, because that's like that's the classic violation of what the ancients would say: never make a definition that's more complicated than the definitum. Never define something by something that's more complicated. So I'll just get right to what this is. Well, there's a temperature to everything, right? Pretty much any place you are in the universe, any object can, some temperature can be assigned to it, and that's what they did. There's hot and cold. See this square? What's on the corners of the square are not the four elements. They're that from which the four elements come from. So there's hot versus cold, right? There's temperature, and temperature's on a continuum. This is think of these are like going off into infinity here. So think of the box, not the diamond, the box. Its ends is kind of coming into two asymptotes all the way out. That you can never find pure heat, never find pure cold, pure dry or pure wet. Because everything has a combination of opposites. Now you'll hear that phrase again and again. The prayer book, Maro Dishu, starts out with it. That's classic. The world is constructed upon the combination of opposites, union of opposites. Yes, that's alchemical. Yes, that's even going back to the Corpus Hermeticum. So people who are into like Jung and that kind of psychology may be familiar with this, or if you're into reading the really hard stuff from like 1,000 years ago. But you have a continuum between heat and cold, and you have a continuum between wet and dry, right? These are opposites. If you think of heat also in the sense of how hot a something is on an atomic level, how much energy is going on, versus how cold it is. If you think of wetness and dryness as how malleable and plasmic something is versus how unmalleable it is. And you can see that there's also something of subaltern or subaltern relationships between these. We explore that as we realize that we can deal with the relationship of opposites by we're using words to stand for concepts that are not purely material. So this fire, this water, this air, this earth is not meaning planet Earth, the air we breathe, the fire of the campfire, or the water of the ocean. It means the element that by which they're made. We're using, like we do with everything, language to represent, and concepts to work on kind of a larger level. And here, let me fix this real quick. There we go. So we saw these opposites, right? Heat versus cold, wet versus dry. Well, what is hot and dry? Fire. If there's hot and dry, that's fire. What would happen if you have hot and wet? You have air. And what happens if air cools down, so it becomes cold and wet? You have water. And what happens if you're going from fire, which is hot and dry, it cools down, it becomes earth. So the cold version of fire is earth, because they're both dry, right? The cold version, the wet version of fire, its wet kind of counterpart is air. What's the opposite of fire? It's water, which is wet and cold, where fire is hot and dry. Air and earth, what are their opposites? Air is hot and wet, earth is cold and dry. And we see some alchemical symbols in there. But let's just look at how this is used liturgically, because that can help us kind of get a sense of where this fits in, to Assyrian spirituality. So this is from the hymn of the Basiliki, Onni to the Basiliki, from the fourth Sunday of Great Lent. And it says, and I'm just going to start right here with the hymn itself, not the psalm verse introducing. O Tahra Ushucha Idhobaruya Chakima. To the amazement and to the glory of that wise creator, Tayyu Wam'ayir is prepared and is aroused, is put in a wakeful state. Kolyum, every day, Lamlile, to those that have intellectual life. Hana Alma, this world, Thuqane, in its foundation, and that by which it's founded. So this is a great version of, a great example of confusing Syriac. You have to realize that this is about Hana al-Mabtuqane, this world in its foundation, in its establishment. Mtayyu Wam'ir is prepared in the sense of it's planned out. Wam'ir, and that plan is put into action, it's aroused. Kolyum, every day, continually, Lamlile, so that it would have intellectual meaning, so that it would have order and would be a reflection of a divine plan. And all of this is thahra, to the amazement, wal shukha, and the praise, the hawbaruya of hawbaruya hakima, of that wise creator. So it's to his praise that the world is wakened such that it is a noetic or intellectually understandable structure. For its changes that to the murtam lachmin be. So in its changes are such that our amazement is taken up by their harmony, right? That the world, in its, as it has diversity, it has a harmonized diversity. This is amazing. Hanun, these saqule, that are opposites. So what are saqule? Well, we were looking at the saqule. There you go. These saqule, that you can think of like energy and the space in which energy moves. You can think about something like earth, fire, air, water. These are all very stable structures. But now think about what happens when DNA comes together. For instance, a sperm and an egg, they unify, and you have the opposites in a way, but you have opposites in many different levels. You've got two sets of DNA, which are kind of two structures of order that go into chaos, but within that chaos, nothing can come out other than the species which originally came together. So if we're talking about, the canine sperm and canine egg, it's not going to be a cat, it's going to be a dog, right? And yet, when that mixture of proteins comes together, it's going to be completely new DNA that nothing else in the world has. So there is a chaoticness in that, but it's a chaos to order. And that's the great paradox of existence that's being looked at here as being what is amazing to the intellect, because that makes harmony. It's like, a song with many notes going on, but without losing order. Because these are opposites, saqula, of each other. Nuhra, fire, umayya, and water, wara'a, and earth, wa'ar, and the air element, ashida. Dadla nat'e nisbar bsuch shuklapehun awud sagi'ith. And don't you dare lose yourself and start thinking that in the multitude of changes that they have a multitude of causes. These are effects of a single cause. They are effects of God and His desire that there be heaven and earth. He took one gushma, one body, he took and he made it into creation. So God, when God made man, when God made Adam, He took a body, and in making that body, there was creation. This is a huge line. Who took it? God. Shkal, what did He do? One gushma. What does that mean? What gushma? Oh, that one. In the pottery claying, in the ngawil, means in the fashioning as a potter would. Of man, God takes that gushma, that body, that corpus, and He makes into of it brita, creation. That in it awdenan, that in it we awdenan, we confess, we acknowledge that that He is the Lord of all. Now this is interesting because it goes to Salman Basra says that man was the first conceived and last created, and the idea is that God conceives of Adam, with Eve in his rib, with Eve with this feminine counterpart, what Jung would call the anima, in him, and you have the paradise story, that completion of man is conceived by God, and then that becomes the model upon which heaven and earth are made, as his body and his soul. Now I'm reading into Solomon of Basra and texts like this, but I think I'm reading something that's there. And Solomon says it simply: man was the first conceived and the last created. That means that God first thought of Adam, and then he created the world in 6 days. I usually put the story of Adam and Eve on day 3 with the creation of earth, because the day 3 earth I see as the elemental earth, that there is a harmony to vegetative and plant life and all that kind of within the universe, and that material, that earth material, is what is being spoken of in Genesis 2 when God takes of it and it's newly moistened. Notice that it's dry, so those elements of water have to come to the earth and for creation to happen. So on that same Sunday, you have a qanuna, or a canon, which is when we insert a hymn kind of with psalm verses. And it's from the morning praises, the matin service, qanun al-sabra. And again, we have this element, and this is an element that comes out all the time, and it comes out in this deeply philosophical fashion. But let's actually look at the hymn. So, Brashid Branura Nuhra. So in the beginning, he created fire and light. Nura is fire, Nuhra is light. So notice how similar those are. Lord, the creator of Nuhra, of light. Rashid bra Nuhra Nuhra, Maria baroya Nuhra. Wa Nura, and to fire, Litwa Nuhra, there was no light. Ula Khamimutha Nuhra, and there wasn't warmth to Nuhra, to light. Shqal Khamimuta Nuhra, he took the warmth, light, min Nuhra, from fire, Yawli Nuhra, and gave it light. Idmazza Nuhra Nuhra, he mixed fire and light together. Min Trehun Waw Nahira, from both of them were the enlightener, that which gives light. Wakhzaw Malache Nuhra, and the angels saw light. Min Shil Itha Waw Nuhra, and of sudden they became light. وَإِيدَهُ دَوْرَ نُورًا, and they knew that he was the one who created the light. هُبْرَالٌ مِنْ قْدَمْ نُهْرًا, for he created them from before the nuhra, the light. وَطْهَارْ بِرْيَاتِ نُهْرًا, and all creations were amazed in the light. شَبَّهُ الْبَحْرُيَّةِ نُهْرًا, they glorified the creator of the light. Now, one of the things you notice is that the angels that are created before the light, and yet the light is this first thing of existence. What's going on here? It's simply that light is existing on a number of different levels. It's being used in a number of different ways in the Fathers. You've got light as in the first order of existence, which in St. Ephraim would be, God says, let there, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. That itself is the qnuma of them. And so there's that light of knowledge. There's that order, right? What it means for existence. To exist outside of God, it's an idea in God's head. That precipitates kind of an intermediate, the four elements. And that you have the usage of nuhra, of light, as that which comes out from God. It's a divine energy. Or in Syriac we use the word an anxiety, a going out from God. For God's, his essence is untouched. You can't reach it, but his energy, his maniyatha, they extend out. His concern for going outwards, right? His energy. It goes out, and as that is divine, it causes that point of order, which itself enlightens the fire, right? So God is the creator of fire and light. The Lord, who is the creator of the light, And fire that was not the light and did not have the warmth of light takes its own chamimutha, its own warmth from the light. So it's either the light of God is that which causes the fire element, right? Because the fire talked about here isn't a campfire. It means what it is to be energies. Let's talk about the first levels of any kind of material existence. So minimally material that we can only mathematically posit its existence the way you would posit the existence of black matter or dealing with stuff like gravity, right? That level of the fire element, that there is energy, and that energy exists in kind of a matrix with lesser and greater amounts of energy. Notice we're talking kind of like they talked about with the elements. That is all coming from the divine ordering principle of light, the divine light that shines out, and in its shining out, it creates a reflection that is a created reflection, right? The divine light's uncreated, and then there's the created fire that comes from the light. It's that kind of energy. And since I've gone now for 22 minutes, please subscribe, turn on notifications, add comments in ways I can make things more clear. Probably end up making me more muddy, but I'll try for clarity. God bless. Take care. Goodbye.